I remember when shortwave radio was a way of spreading news as well as an interesting hobby. Early users of shortwave used the dots and dashes of international telegraph or Morse code, such as dash dot dash dot dash dash dot dash, meaning the letters C, Q, but also meaning CQ. Otto Eppers lived at rear of 212 South 4th Street and was an avid user of shortwave communication called ham radio with a license or call sign of WSEA. He was a detective or a night watchman for several businesses, traveling between him at night on his bicycle and always accompanied by his beautiful white husky dog companion. It has been said that during the 1936 St. Patrick's Day flooding, Otto broadcast false reports that the water was rapidly rising and soon would be in his living room. But in fact, the floodwater would have had to rise another 25 feet to reach his house. Daisy Street was Route 322. I remember when Daisy Street was a part of U.S. Route 322, the Lakes to Sea Highway. It also ran on 2nd Street, around Dead Man's Curve, and then past the Windmill Restaurant near the Hyde Bridge. The route went through Hyde, Curwensville, then on to Grampian, and eventually to Cleveland. Going east from Clearfield, the highway passed directly into most towns, such as Mineral Springs, Woodland, and Bigler. Originally, roads were made for short-trip, horse-drawn traffic that needed to get into the towns. Today, highways are designed to bypass these small towns and villages. Times have changed, and so have our highways. Broom Maker. I remember when there was a man in Clearfield whose occupation was making brooms. He created them by hand in a workshop in his home on Weaver Street. People seldom got to see or visit in his shop because he did not want anything there disturbed. He had a place for everything, and everything was in its place. George Beers never got to see any of his brooms, his craftsmanship. You see, and this is no pun, he could not see. He was blind. Despite his handicap, he made a good living for his family. Women who bought his brooms agreed that he produced a quality product at a reasonable price. 4 paved streets. I remember when all the streets on West Side were dirt roads and full of potholes, except for 4 of the main streets that had pavement. That was okay because horses didn't need or like pavement. Nickel Street from the bridge to Turnpike Avenue had a hard surface composed of brick pavers laid down by hand. Both Weaver Street and Turnpike Avenue, the main road to the hospital, were paved with concrete. West Market Street had a brick surface from the bridge partway up the hill, even above Bigler Road. Rain flowing down an old mining road inundated some of the bricks, so the upper section of the street became impassable. We poke along. I remember when, during the Great Depression, President Franklin D. Roosevelt created the Works Progress Administration to provide jobs for the unemployed and improve our roads and infrastructure. It was generally known simply as the WPA. It was a very large program with many workers happy to have a job. One of the first projects tackled by the WPA men in Clearfield was building gutters on both sides of our streets. This involved installing pipelines under the gutters to carry the surface water away, then laying native stone blocks to form the rounded gutters with water inlets at street corners and alley intersections. Later, stone base and street paving between the gutters finished the street work. Even though it was sometimes called We Poke Along, the WPA program aided the nation in ending the Big Depression. Railway Express. I remember when, long before FedEx, UPS, and most truck freight haulers, there was one large national freight company called Railway Express Agency. They mostly handled shipments that were LCL, less than a carload. In Clearfield, Railway Express was located at the New York Central Station near the Lower Bridge, that is the Nickel Street Bridge. Freight was brought in by rail almost daily in special freight cars, unloaded onto huge solid-tire wagons and stored in a warehouse. 2 large box trucks were used for final delivery to customers throughout the vicinity of Clearfield. The demise of Railway Express came about with the arrival of new roads built for heavy traffic. It became impossible for the railway to compete with the lower prices offered by truck freight companies. I remember when I was one of the Boy Scouts in Troop Number 2 painting the Clearfield Sign every year on the side hill and west side. Tufton Hardware contributed the lime to make slurry to use for paint. The slurry and wallpaper brushes were delivered uphill road by truck and then scout carried up the hill. Several Saturdays were needed to paint the flat stones white and bright again. To pay the expenses, a strawberry festival was held at Presbyterian Church, and any profit gained was used for scout camping at the KFC campground along the river near Lumber City. The stones were removed during World War II because the sign was deemed a possible navigation aid to enemy aircraft. The silk mill. I remember when the silk mill on Turnpike Avenue was turning out real silk and fine velvet cloth. In summer months, the workers opened the windows for fresh air, and some distance away you could hear the humming looms. For fire protection, they had a large outdoor water tank mounted on a steel framework near the building. The business, called Clearfield Textile, was owned by a French company, said to be an excellent employer to work for. I remember 2 tennis courts for employees only, a club room, and housing for some of them in the textile houses, as we called them. The main building is now Expo 2 at the fairground. Steam heat. I remember when some of the homes and business buildings in downtown Clearfield were heated in winter with steam provided by the electric power company, which had a steam-powered generator plant located along Power Avenue. There is still an electrical substation located in that area. Excess steam was piped under Levy Avenue and 2nd Street to the center of the business area. Manholes were provided at intervals to access the underground pipeline. On cold days, steam would rise from the manholes and heat would melt snowflakes as they fell on the manhole covers. The steam was not from a leaking pipe, but was created from groundwater being heated by the hot pipeline. In frigid weather, the hot manhole cover was a good place to warm your feet. Shredded wheat cards. I remember when shredded wheat came in a box with a picture of Niagara Falls printed on it. 4 layers of biscuits to a box meant 3 cardboard cards to separate the layers. The cards were useful and printed with games or information in a series to interest you in collecting all of the series. In summer, we ate shredded wheat with milk and sugar. In winter, we liked to warm the biscuits with hot water before pouring on the milk. My grandmother ate hers after pouring her coffee over it. I recall that more than once I put shredded wheat cards in my shoes when they got huge holes in the soles. It helped a lot. Universal language. I remember when 4 foreign languages were taught in Clearfield High School: Spanish, French, Latin, and German. It took at least 2 years to learn the basics of a language and even more time to be able to speak and converse in that tongue. Today, instantaneous communication and rapid transportation have changed our world. We can now think of people around the world as our neighbors. Certainly, it would improve our relationship with other nations if we all spoke the same language, a universal or world language. I believe this will occur, perhaps in your lifetime. Hopefully, that will reduce those misunderstandings that seem to bring about wars. One world, one language, a universal language. Third Ward teachers. I remember when I attended Third Ward Elementary School in Clearfield. I can still recall the names of all the teachers. They were single, unmarried, except for Mrs. Irene McGonigal, who taught 5th grade along with Miss Edna Freud, the principal, on the 2nd floor. The 4th grade teachers were Miss Twyla Matthews and Miss Catherine Tribune, also on the 4th floor. The other 6 teachers had classrooms on the 1st floor. Miss Leah Heil and Miss Florence Irwin taught 3rd grade. The 2nd grade teachers were Miss Margaret Spooner and Miss Pauline London. Miss Louise Onstadt and Miss Rebecca Ferguson taught beginning students in the 1st grade. I learned to read and write, plus a lot more, from these exceptional ladies. Clearfield Street Sledding. I remember when the snow in winter stayed on the ground longer than now. The borough's preferred treatment of snow on the streets was to spread coal ashes by hand from the rear of a truck. This was less costly than buying salt, and snowplows were not yet in use. The crew, for some unspoken reason, seemed to conserve ashes on Clearfield Street, or sometimes not treat it at all. That made Clearfield Street the place for West Side kids to go with their sleds after supper. Vehicle traffic was sparse. We started the sled ride above West 6th Street and coasted all the way to Turnpike Avenue with the bolder kids sometimes going somewhat further. Maybe 40 or 50 kids were there and chatted with each other while walking all the way back to the top of the hill. Happy times. River ice. I remember when ice formed on our river earlier in the fall than it does now. Currently, water from the Curwensville Lake exits from the bottom of the dam, where the water is warmer because it's not in contact with cold air temperatures. Some years the ice stayed most of the winter. The ice was thinnest along the shore, or not existent there at all. This was the result of warm sanitary sewer water being discharged along the riverbank. If you could get on the ice, it was safer to be on thicker ice away from the shoreline. If someone fell in, it was almost always in shallow water where they could wade ashore. I know. Lyric theater. I remember when, during the 1930s, the Lyric Theater was the place for kids to be every Saturday afternoon. It was pandemonium at times. For just 10 cents, you and your friends could spend half a day together at the movies. First on the screen were the previews of coming events to start the show. Then the feature film. It was almost always a cowboy or western show with lots of shooting and horseback chases. In black and white, of course. Oh yes, and then there was the serial, that continuing story that spanned over 10 or 15 weeks. The review of the story so far took as long to watch as the newest portion of the serial film. It was a good time for kids.